Heard every week on the amateur radio bands all around the world, broadcast on low-power AM and FM stations all across the United States and more, and one of the first podcasts on the Internet. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, the worldwide premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. Here are the stories for release around the earth as we come to air with edition number 1410 of This Week in Amateur Radio. Amateurs helped forecasters with real-time weather data during the Northeast blizzard last month. The state of Tennessee approves credentials for amateur radio technician licensees. The Radio Amateurs of Canada respond to the closure of the weather radio service all across Canada. Indiana amateurs living under HOAs gain antenna protections. The ISS amateur radio packet system is activated for temporary APRS testing. The ARRL publishes the Winter Section Manager election results. We will have them for you. A group of amateurs received the signals coming from Voyager. And FCC Chairman Carr pitches a plan to apply spectrum to what he calls weird space stuff. All of this and a lot more are coming up in this week's report. These headline stories will come to you in a moment along with this week's special features. We'll visit with Bruce Page, KK5DO, and get an update from AMSAT and what's new with all of those amateur satellites in orbit. Australia's own Onno Benschop, VK6FLAB, and Foundations of Amateur Radio, gets back to his The Big Yak building project. In this edition, part 15, he finds himself playing with radio, now with software. Our own amateur radio historian, Will Rogers, K5WLR, returns with another new edition of A Century of Amateur Radio. This week, Will takes us back to 1924, where we find that for nearly a year, hams had been operating in their first assigned band of wavelengths, 150 to 200 meters. They had also been experimenting below 150 meters by special government permission. The story continues in Part 4, the final edition of a special episode entitled 6 Segments Sans Spark. And we will stop by and visit with Bill Sawyers, AJ8B in the DX Corner, with all the latest news on DXpeditions, DX upcoming contests, and a lot more. That's all straight ahead as North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service, This Week in Amateur Radio, takes to the air right now. Reporting from our headquarters studio facility just outside of Albany, New York, where it's been raining now for about 2 days, I'm George, W2XBS.
Reporting this week from our news bureau in downtown Syracuse, New York, from ham radio station K2MST inside the Museum of Science and Technology, I'm Chris Perrine, KB2FAF.
From beautiful Bradenton, Florida, where an unexpected thunderstorm and 6 inches of rain nearly washed out one of my pod activations, I'm Mike Nickolich, K9DX Mike.
And reporting from our news bureau just outside Rochester, New York, along the southern shore of Lake Ontario, this is George, Kilo Charlie 2, Oscar X-Ray Juliet.
And reporting from the Ham Shack TV studios in Knoxville, Tennessee, where bring on the warm weather. It's a beautiful 80 degrees here in East Tennessee. I'm Josh Marler, AA4WX.
Reporting from our news bureau in Salem, Ohio, this is Denny Haight, NZ8D.
And reporting from our True New York News Bureau, which is finally starting to thaw a little bit, I'm Eric, Kilo Delta 2, Romeo Juliet X-Ray.
Coming to you from a rather nippy, but still sunny Space Coast in Florida, I'm Ed Johnson, W2PH.
And reporting from our amateur radio outpost in the Catskill Mountains of upstate New York, where the snowbanks are shrinking and mud season has officially begun. It's supposed to be 70 degrees here in a couple of days. I'm Don Hulick, K2ATJ.
And reporting from our news bureau in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where spring has arrived early, along with some rather scary weather, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, dodging that weather.
This Week in Amateur Radio is coming to you guaranteed 100% human. Hello, everyone. Before we get into this week's newscast, I'd like to tell everyone that This Week in Amateur Radio now has its own Discord server. That's right, a place online where we can discuss everything technology and amateur radio. So join us. Just go to Discord on your computer or download the Discord app on your portable device and search for TWIAR or This Week in Amateur Radio. We look forward to seeing you on the new This Week in Amateur Radio Discord server. And now with our lead story, here is Chris Perrine, KB2 FAF.
A historic blizzard paralyzed much of the Northeast in late February, and amateur radio operators were on the air to help forecasters keep track of the storm's impact. With more on this story, we go to John Ross, KD8 IDJ, who files this special report.
Southeastern New England was one of the hardest hit areas. ARRL Eastern Massachusetts Section Emergency Coordinator and Boston Area Skywarn Coordinator Rob Macedo, KD1CY, reported that area Skywarn nets across New England were activated to support the National Weather Service Boston Norton office, as well as state and local emergency management and broadcast media with timely updates on the storm. We had area Skywarn nets activating on an every 1 to 2 hour basis, providing snowfall, wind gusts, wind damage, and coastal flood reports, said Macedo, adding that reports were received from Skywarn spotters of snowfall as high as 43 inches in Tiverton, Rhode Island, and 41 inches in Fall River, Massachusetts. Providence, Rhode Island received 37.8 inches, breaking the state snowfall record, and more details on the amateur radio response in southern New England are available on ARRL News. Combined area Skywarn nets were also activated in the ARRL Connecticut and northern New Jersey sections, with stations asked to report on snow depth and wind speed. In addition, the Department of Homeland Security shares high-frequency HF radio program, which includes amateur radio as part of its network, issued a blizzard watch requesting voluntary activation of all participating stations in New York and New Jersey as a real-time test of its Civil Operations Support, CSO, HF interoperability network. Stations were asked to submit a county status message from their respective counties using WinLink and VARA HF chat. Operation Coordinator Richard Martino Jr., KB2SNF, reported that 23 amateurs and 8 shared stations in 20 counties submitted reports. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
These amateur radio reports were relayed to the National Weather Service forecast offices serving the New York and Boston areas. In an after-action memo, Martino noted that the amateur radio service is the backbone of real-time information in the case of a real-world CSO event, adding that amateur radio is an invaluable CSO resource on a national level, and that cannot be understated or overlooked.
The FCC Amateur Radio Technician Class license is now an approved industry credential in the state of Tennessee. The certification has been placed as Tier 1 recognized and will be included on the 2026-27 statewide industry credential list. Stephanie Kelly, Director of Credentialing and Post-Secondary Success, Division of Post-Secondary, Workforce CTE, and Military Readiness for the Tennessee Department of Education, said this certification will benefit students throughout the state. Students across the state will have access to high-value, industry-recognized credentials that support strong post-secondary and workforce pathways. The statewide industry credential program promotes credentials for grade K through 12 students through a structured process that allows for the submission of credentials for review by various agencies. The program is designed to enhance post-secondary articulation and provide students with certification, credentials, and degrees in high-skilled and high-wage industries. The initial application was submitted by Riverside High School teacher Justin McLean, KQ4ANJ. We sincerely look forward to the next steps in getting students licensed, on the air, and learning with all the benefits and applications in amateur radio, said McLean.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at TWIAR.net.
Radio Amateurs of Canada is saddened to learn about the closure of the weather radio service provided by Environment and Climate Change Canada. For decades, weather radio has been a trusted and resilient source of real-time weather alerts and public safety information for Canadians, particularly in rural, remote, and northern communities where cellular and internet coverage can be limited or unreliable. Continuous broadcast weather alerts have assisted in supporting emergency preparedness, severe weather awareness, and community resilience. Many amateur radio operators and emergency volunteers have relied on these broadcasts as part of their situational awareness during storms, wildfires, and other public safety events. RAC recognizes the evolving nature of communications technology. However, any transition away from dedicated broadcast alerting services must ensure that no Canadians are left without timely access to critical warnings. Redundancy in emergency communication systems is not a luxury, it is a necessity. Amateur radio operators across Canada remain committed to supporting emergency management partners at the municipal, provincial, and federal levels. Our volunteers stand ready to assist with communication support when conventional systems fail or become overloaded. Radio Amateurs of Canada encourages continued dialogue with government and public safety stakeholders to ensure that Canada maintains a robust, accessible, and resilient national alerting framework that serves all communities effectively.
The Indiana General Assembly has passed, and Governor Mike Braun signed a bill that adds protection for amateur radio operators who live in a homeowners association, or HOA, regulated housing developments. Official language of House Bill 1152 can be found at Indiana General Assembly House Bill 1152, Homeowners Association Matters. Credit for adding the new language goes to Hunter Reed, Kilo Delta 9, Yankee Lima, Quebec, Campbell Reed, Kilo Delta 9, Golf Echo Kilo, and State Senator Scott Alexander for their efforts writing and introducing the bill, and to the Muncie Area Amateur Radio Club, an ARRL-affiliated club. This bill takes effect on July 1st, 2026.
It is the beginning of a new month, and that means it is time for the monthly Volunteer Monitoring Report. The Volunteer Monitor Program is a joint initiative between the ARRL and the FCC to enhance compliance in the amateur radio service. This is this month's activity report of the VM program. An operator in Wisconsin was issued an advisory notice concerning a beacon on a 60-meter frequency not authorized to U.S. operators. A technician operator in California was issued an advisory notice for 20-meter FT8 operation, a band on which technicians have no privileges. An operator in Washington was issued an advisory notice for repeatedly transmitting free DV digital software on 40 meters and refusing to vacate the frequency when requested. An operator in New York was issued an advisory notice for interference with the Jamaica emergency net on 20 meters. Another operator in New York was issued an advisory notice for deliberate interference with amateur operators on 20 meters, and for using CB equipment on the amateur frequencies. An operator in Chesterfield, Virginia received a commendation for providing assistance to new licensees, one of which was 11 years old, and donating radio equipment and installation and operation assistance to get the new licensees on 10 meters. There was one meeting, and the FCC accepted HF cases in North Carolina, Kentucky, Georgia, and Missouri for enforcement sanctions. A new automated FT8 monitoring system was implemented in January and is undergoing testing. It will randomly monitor FT8 and FT4 frequencies to ensure that the operators hold the proper license class for the band that they are using. A technician operator in Indiana was issued an advisory concerning 20 and 40 meter FT8 operation, a band on which technicians have no privileges. Operators in Georgia and Kentucky were issued advisories regarding improperly wide signals on 3.927 MHz. That resulted in splatter over 8 kHz. Section 97.307, Subpart A of the Commission's rule states, No amateur station transmission shall occupy more bandwidth than necessary for the information rate and emission type being transmitted in accordance with good amateur practice. A general class operator in Ohio was issued an advisory for operation on 14.225 MHz, too close to the band edge. General class operators in Connecticut and Maine were issued advisories for single sideband operation on 20 meters outside of the general class allocation. A technician operator in Illinois was issued an advisory for SSB operation on 20 meters, again a band on which technicians have no privileges. An amateur radio club in California was issued an advisory for operation with an expired license. An amateur extra class operator in California was issued an advisory for SSB operation on 14.126 MHz during a DX contest. SSB operation is not allowed on 20 meters below 14.150 MHz. A station in South Carolina was issued an advisory for failure to identify for more than 50 minutes on 2 occasions on 40 meters. Section 97.119 Subpart A requires amateur stations to transmit their assigned call sign at the end of each communication and at least every 10 minutes during a communication. And finally, an operator in Colorado received a commendation for efficiency and courtesy while managing the Colorado Severe Weather Net on the 448.400 MHz repeater. An operator in Ohio received a commendation for exceptional courtesy during a Parks on the Air operation, giving the frequency to a scheduled net operation. The totals for this month's monitoring were 1,370 hours on HF frequencies, 1,097 hours on VHF frequencies and above, plus 42 other monitoring hours, for a total of 2,509 hours. We thank Volunteer Monitor Program Administrator Riley Hollingsworth, K4ZDH, for this report.
Amateur radio on the International Space Station reports that the packet radio in the Zavita service module has been configured for temporary APRS operation on 437.825 MHz. The system is expected to remain active for testing, giving stations worldwide an opportunity to receive packet transmissions and attempt limiting digipeating through the orbiting station. Operators wishing to access the ISS Digipeater are advised to include APRS or APRSAT in the path field of their transmission. The service module station is operating under the call sign of RS0ISS using FM packet at 1200 BPS. APRS recommends transmit power of 5 watts or less, preferably with a directional antenna, to improve uplink reliability and help minimize interference. The current activation follows a prolonged outage of the service module amateur radio system that began during APRS SlowScan TV Series 30 in November of 25. Images were received early in the event, but subsequent passes produced no SSTV transmissions, and the event was ultimately scrubbed. The service module radio used for APRS and SSTV was then taken out of service while teams investigated the problem. Subsequent APRS updates are reported that the primary Kenwood DG710AG was replaced by an onboard spare of the D710E, while teams continued troubleshooting and preparing reset procedures. Status reports in the following months continued to show the service module radio offline, while restoration efforts were planned and carried out. The newly announced APRS configuration suggests the system is now being evaluated through on-orbit testing following these repair activities. Temporary activations such as this allow radio amateurs worldwide to help confirm reception, observe system behavior, and provide useful reports while the station's amateur radio capability is assessed. APRS encourages operators to monitor the official status channels for schedule updates and to share reception reports. Additional information on ISS radio operations and current station status is available on the ARISS webpage.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
Two ARRL section manager elections that were conducted this winter came to conclusion on Tuesday, February 24th, when ballots from North Carolina and Virginia were counted at ARRL headquarters. To bring us all up to date with the latest election results, we go to League headquarters where John Ross, KD8IDJ, files this report.
In North Carolina, ARRL members re-elected were Marvin Hoffman, WA4NC, and David Nicholson, NA2AWE. Hoffman has been the section manager of North Carolina since April of 2000. His new term of office starts on April 1st, 2026, and extends through June 30th, 2028. Meanwhile, in Virginia, Mike Amone, WA8AHZ, and Terry Buzzard, KA8TNF, have been elected. Amone has been the Virginia section's affiliated club coordinator since 2022 and is the current board chair for the Vienna Wireless Association. His term of office begins April 1st and it runs through June 30th, 2028. Jack Smith, KE4LWT, the current Virginia section manager, will be concluding his term of office on March 31st, 2026. Smith has led the Virginia field organization since April of 2022. The following incumbent ARRL section managers did not face opposition and were declared elected for their upcoming new terms of office, which begin April 1st, 2026, that extend through June 30th, 2028. John Fritchie, K2QY, Eastern New York. Houston Polson, N5YS in Louisiana, Bruce Krypton, AG6X in San Diego, Christian Stallkamp, KI0D in South Dakota. Nominations for section managers in Eastern Pennsylvania and Pacific sections will be resolicited in the April 2026 issue of QST, since no nominating petitions were received by the recipient deadline in early December of 2025. There's more to read about these elections, and you can do that at arrl.org. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
Bob Wilson, W3BIG, who served as ARRL Eastern Pennsylvania section manager since 2023, decided not to run for a new term of office. In the ARRL Pacific section, Alan Manchin, AD6E, has decided not to run for a new term of office as section manager after serving since 2023. ARRL has appointed Heather Flewelling, AH7RF of Honolulu, to be the ARRL Pacific section manager starting April 1, 2026. She has been the assistant section manager since 2023. Wes Tester, K2AHU, was appointed in early January to be the ARRL section manager of the Virgin Islands. Tester of Christiansted, who had been assistant section manager since 2018, succeeds Fred Kleber, K9VV, who is moving out of the section. Kleber served as section manager for 13.5 years. And finally, Daryl Davis, KT4WX, has been appointed as ARRL West Central Florida section manager as of February 1, 2026, to fulfill the current term of office after Jimmy Russ, AB4KA, needed to step aside as section manager, a position that he has held since July 2025. Davis, of Fort Meade, previously served as section manager from 2015 through 2020.
Quick thinking by hams in the midst of a power outage in Cuba are being credited with connecting a critically ill child with urgent medical care. As an outage swept through several communities in the municipality of Rio Cauto in eastern Cuba, disabling electric power and the telephone service, a 6-year-old girl lay feverish and in pain, her 12th hour of suffering. The doctor treating her at the family home in Granma province suspected appendicitis requiring emergency transport. An outage resulting from a power grid failure prevented him from directly contacting an ambulance. The physician turned to a father-son team of amateur radio operators, Jorge Bonilla Mainegra and his son Edgar Bonilla Mainegra. The hams, however, found that their own radios were also without backup power because of the fuel shortage, that is, until a neighbor let them make use of the battery from his motorcycle. The general call was received in Santiago de Cuba by station CL8YDY, who was able to connect with the emergency system. The station is listed on QRZ.com as being in Santiago de Cuba. The call sign holder is Joandris Garcia Rodriguez. According to various media reports, surgery was performed at the hospital and was a success.
The Wireless Institute of Australia's Technical Advisory Committee has fine-tuned its recommendations for changes to the amateur radio band plan after reviewing more than 36 submissions. It is now recommending that the emergency communications channel on 40 meters be aligned with International Amateur Radio Union Region 3 on 7.110 MHz, that the SSB portion of the 6 meters band be widened, and that 1.87 MHz and 3.686 MHz be chosen as the AM centers of activity for 160 meters and 80 meters. The committee's full document, which reaffirms its other original proposals and clarifies use of the FM analog ATV band, has been published online. Visit the consultation webpage for more information.
A hot air balloon with 2 passengers aboard was blown into a cell phone tower standing 925 feet, or more than 280 meters, high in Longview, a city east of Dallas, Texas. The crash on February 28th left the 2 passengers dangling near the top of the tower as the balloon became entangled in its guy cables. Emergency crews from police and fire departments responded. As rescuers climbed using several ropes, they battled the same strong winds that had led to the crash, working for more than an hour to free the passengers. In what was deemed a rare, high-risk operation, they were brought down safely. The scene in Texas was reminiscent of an incident in Albuquerque, New Mexico in 2024, when a hot air balloon crashed into the tower of radio station KKOB AM. The 3 passengers on board that balloon were also rescued safely.
ARRL has announced that ICOM America is the official sponsor of the ARRL Year of the Club, supporting the initiatives that spotlight and strengthen ARRL-affiliated clubs throughout 2026. John Ross, KD8IDJ, has more.
The ARRL Board of Directors designated 2026 as the Year of the Club, recognizing the essential role that local amateur radio clubs play in building community, mentoring new operators, and delivering public service at the grassroots level. This nationwide focus celebrates clubs as engines of civic engagement and increases public awareness of the amateur radio service through local connections across the United States. Amateur radio clubs are the backbone of the hobby, said Ray Novak, N9JA, Senior Sales Manager at ICOM America. ICOM works closely with them to support education, growth, and engagement. Strong clubs create strong communities, and ICOM is proud to support them. ARRL has emphasized the broader impact of the initiative. The Year of the Club places a spotlight on the vibrant community of radio clubs, said ARRL CEO David Minster, NA2AA. By investing in clubs, ICOM and ARRL are reinforcing the local foundation of amateur radio. Where mentorship begins, technical skills are shared, and public service takes root, said Minster. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
Through its sponsorship, ICOM is supporting content that highlights the work of radio clubs in QST, ARRL newsletters and publications, and through resources and activities designed to help clubs thrive. As part of ARRL's broader 2026 activities, ARRL has launched the America 250 Worked All States operating event, a year-long on-air activity encouraging amateur radio operators worldwide to make contact with all 50 states in honor of America's 250th anniversary. Radio clubs are participating and supporting a special endorsement for operators who contact ARRL-affiliated clubs in all 50 states during the year. In addition, clubs and hamfests are hosting W1AW portable activations in all 50 states, creating another endorsement opportunity for participants. ARRL also announced that the theme of 2026 ARRL Field Day, held June 27th and 28th, will be Amateur Radio, a national resource. Since 1933, Field Day has been the largest on-the-air operating event in North America, showcasing amateur radio's readiness to provide resilient communications in times of need while engaging the public throughout hands-on demonstrations and community outreach. This year's Field Day will emphasize club participation and the use of club call signs. For more information about the ARRL Year of the Club, the America 250 Worked All States operating event, and 2026 ARRL Field Day, visit www.arrl.org.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available as an on-demand stream from Spotify, Deezer, and wherever podcasts are available.
Hello and welcome to the DX Corner for your weekly dose of DX. I'm Bill, AJB. The following DX information comes from Bernie, W3UR, editor of the Daily DX, the Weekly DX, and the How's DX column in QST. If you would like a free 2-week trial of the Daily DX, your only source of real-time DX information, just drop me a note at thedxmentor@gmail.com. And you may ask, why is real-time so important? Well, I can tell you. The guys are down at 3Y0 Kilo on Bouvet Island, which we'll hear about in a minute. And every time they get operators set up or new frequency changes, etc., they send it out to a few individuals. And Bernie's one of them. He then broadcasts it out to all of his subscribers. So it definitely gives you an edge. But since we mentioned Bouvet, let's start and get an update. As of March 3rd at 14:45 UTC, here's what we're told. Finally, a nice sunny day here on the island. Both camps are safe and secure with 8 tents in total. One camp is located at the North America Focus location. The equipment is 10 ICOM IC7610 radios and 10 amplifiers in the camps. ACOM 2020s, 1400s, and 500s. We have antennas for all bands in the air except 10 meters. We're operating 4 stations now, ranging 500 watts to a kilowatt. We have 2 Yagis for 20 meters, one for 17 and 12, one 18-meter top-loaded 160 vertical, and one full-size 80-meter vertical. Tomorrow, which would be March 4th, the 10-meter antennas will go up with another one for 17 and 12 meters. Expect 160 meters every night as long as the antennas hold up. We do have spares. Tonight, we plan 160, 80, 40, and 30 meters. Expected operation until March 18th or March 20th when weather dependent. See you in the pileups. And that was from the chief pilot, James, KB2 FMH. They've had quite a struggle due to weather, and sometimes they had 30-foot waves and such, but they're there, they're getting set up, and I've seen them on the majority of the bands, and they're putting people in the log, so that's what we were hoping for. Well, a de-expedition that put a lot of people in the log and is now QRV is the KP5/NP3 VI Deschisheo Island. So let's get that update. As of March 1st, a couple of days ago, at 2200 UTC, at this time, the team has made over 104,000 contacts and worked more than 20,000 unique call signs. We are very pleased with the performance of our operators and the reliability and efficiency of our fully solar-powered remote deployment unit. As we approach our scheduled QRT date of March 3rd, which we're past that now, we would like to sincerely thank the worldwide amateur radio community and our generous sponsors for their outstanding support and for making this groundbreaking low-power, fully solar-powered operation possible. We extend our deep appreciation to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for working closely with us, granting permission for this activation, accompanying us to Deschisheo, and allowing our equipment to remain on the island for nearly 2 months. What a great job and a great effort by those guys led by Otis. So kudos to you guys. So we have a couple of African updates. The first is 5 November from Nigeria. Bodo, Delta Fox 8 Delta X-Ray, will be in Abuja, Nigeria, working at the Voice of Nigeria broadcasting station until March 10th. Operating under his new call sign 5 November 7 Quebec Bravo Radio, he plans to be active on the air as time allows and will participate in the ARRL DX single sideband contest. Using 100 watts and possibly Voice of Nigeria's large curtain antenna, of which he'll get about 19 dB gain, he will operate CW, sideband, and FT8 on 10 through 80 meter bands. QSLs are accepted via LOTW, Direct, Bureau, or OQRS after the activity. So another African de-expedition that's really tearing up the airwaves is Guinea-Bissau, which is Juliet 5. 124,600 QSOs and 23,800 different call signs after 7.25 days of operation, with still 13 days to go. Kind of wonder how high they can get. I was lucky to get them on 160 last night. I was very appreciative of that. So thanks, guys. Today, which is Tuesday, was kind of a maintenance day. Some low-band receive antennas were improved. We also solved an annoying noise problem, which had only started on Saturday. We found out that the neighbor had installed a new solar system, and he was kind enough to understand our problem and let us check his new system out. We found a very cheap inverter and 2 12-volt battery packs as a buffer. By just switching the inverter off, all the noise was gone. We could have started playing around with ferret chokes and other things, but it was easier to convince the neighbor to keep his system switched off for the next 2 weeks and receive his electricity over a temporary 3x2.5 cable from our generator instead. On 6 meters, we caught 2 more openings to Europe, but still not reaching deep into Central, Northern, or Eastern Europe. Well, here's an update from Vanuatu, which is Yankee Juliet. Juliet Kilo 1, Juliet X-Ray Zulu, Aki will be active from Port Vila, Vanuatu as Yankee Juliet 1, Juliet X-Ray Zulu until April 3rd. He will operate on the 80 through 6 meter vans with activity on after 5 p.m. Vanuatu time on weekdays and all day during weekends. And his webpage, which is the QRZ.com webpage for Yankee Juliet 1, Juliet X-Ray Zulu, will be updated once the specific dates are confirmed. For St. Bartholomew, which is Fox Juliet, on February 12th, Andreas, Delta Kilo 6 Alpha Sierra, began his February-March 2026 Fox Juliet stroke Delta Kilo 6 Alpha Sierra operation from St. Bart's. He'll be QRV on CW, FT4, and FT8 on 3.5 through 50 megahertz, including participation in the ARL International DX contest. And you can QSL that operation via Delta Kilo 6 Alpha Sierra, either direct or via the Bureau. We have an update on 3 Baker 8 Mauritius and 3 Baker 9 Rodriguez. So far, 3 Baker 8 Golf has been reported on 20, 15, and 10 meters CW, and the operator is Victor Uniform 3 Oscar Papa Tango, also known as Oscar Mike 0 Golf Alpha, Savarna. This is a 48-day trip, February 11th to March 30th, with the Rodriguez portion, which will be call sign 3 Baker 9 November, another 48 days until May 20th. This portion from Port Maturin. It appears he also plans to visit Sri Lanka and Bangladesh in the second half of 2026. From Japan, we have Juliet Delta 1 Stroke Mike, which is Manami Torishima. Taki, Juliet Golf 8 November Quebec Juliet, will be working again on Manami Torishima as Juliet Golf 8 November Quebec Juliet stroke JD1 until mid-May, operating with 50 watts and an HB9CV style 17-15 meter 2-element antenna. And you can QSL that Manami Torishima operation via JA8CJY. We have an update on Anguilla. Jack, M0PLX, and his comrades SP9FIH and SQ2RAD will be QRV from Anguilla until March 22nd. They will use the call sign VP2ELX, VP2EWE, and VP2EAD respectively. Their activities will cover 160 through 6 meters, with each focusing on specific frequencies. Jack will concentrate on 15, 40, and 80 meter sideband. Operations will take place on sideband and CW, utilizing multiple transceivers, amplifiers, and both vertical and directional antennas. During the 3-week stay, Jack also plans short sightseeing and possible radio activation from St. Martin, which is F8, FS, Saba, which is PJ6, and St. Bart's, which is Fox Juliet. So good luck to them. Well, here's a new one you're going to want to keep an eye on. The UK sovereign base area on Cyprus, which is the prefix Zulu Charlie 4. Now, this is not rare, but it is not common. The Zulu Charlie 4 Charlie and Zulu Charlie 4 Zulu team are scheduled to depart Edinburgh, Scotland, Wednesday morning, which was yesterday, heading for Cyprus, and will probably begin operations early Thursday on March 5th. So I know this is being listened to on the 7th or 8th, but keep an ear out for those guys. You're going to want to get them in the log. From Canada, VE, we have VO2 LAB stroke VY0 from Iqaluit, Baffin Island, Nunavut territory, where Jim, WB2REM, is operating remotely from the Victor Yankee 0 India Romeo Charlie station. And you can QSL Jim via club log, QRZ, LOTW, but no paper confirmations. And Jim's a great operator and a really good guy. So if you get a chance, listen to his pileup, because he does a wonderful job. Well, we mentioned something about Africa, and I have yet another country. Namibia, Victor 5. Gunter, Delta Kilo 2 Whiskey Hotel, is currently operating as Victor 51 Whiskey Hotel from a farm near Amarumo, Namibia, and will remain active until March 24th, covering frequencies from 160 through 6, including 60 meters, Joe. So give a listen for Gunter. And we have an upcoming de-expedition, actually a couple of them, from the Austral Islands, which is Fox Ocean stroke Alpha. Quote, "The excitement is mounting, just over a week to go until we depart," from the TX5 EU group. "A lot of the prep work is done, extensive radio antenna, spare parts, etc. Quote, "Everything has been planned in detail, tested, and packed. The German and Dutch ops have been meeting regularly, mostly on video conferences. On March 11th, the 6 ops from Germany and the Netherlands will meet at the airport in Paris and fly to San Francisco and onward to Papeete and Ravavi. They expect to be on the air March 13th, with operations continuing through March 25th. So we have an update on Sable Island, which is Charlie Yankee 0 Sierra. Murray, WA4DAN, reports on behalf of the CY0S Sable Island DXpedition as follows, quote, all preparations have been completed for the CY0S DXpedition, which will be March 19th to the 31st. The team focused on prepping the guy rings for the Yagi antenna and the sections. All guy rings have 4 guy ropes attached to them. It is much easier to do this now than in the 40-knot winds on Sable. It has been a very challenging but typical winter on Sable with high winds and surf. Wind gusts of 50 to 60 knots were experienced earlier this week in yet another storm system. In preparation for the frequent 40 to 50 knot winds, the team reinforced the guying system on all antenna masts and spider poles. All 42-inch guy anchors were inspected and any questionable anchors were replaced. Each anchor has a pre-installed galvanized eye bolt near the top of the anchor. The team is in constant contact with the Parks Canada as to conditions on the island, end quote. So good luck to those guys. And finally, this week, the DX Mentor YouTube/podcast episode will feature Sven, Delta Juliet 4 Mike X-Ray. Sven will be discussing the upcoming Sierra 21 Whiskey Delta DXpedition to Bangladesh, as well as the Next Generation DX Association. It's possible by the time you listen to this, they've already departed for Bangladesh. So check it out on podcast and let me know what you think. Until next week, this is Bill, AJB, saying 7-3, and thanks to my XYL Karen for her love and support. I hope to hear you in the pile-ups. Have a great DX week.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
Foundations of Amateur Radio. A little while ago, I discussed a lovely article by programmer, artist and game designer Blinry called 50 Things You Can Do with a Software-Defined Radio. This week, it occurred to me that I could use their article as a framework to further explore my Bald Yak project. If you're unfamiliar, the Bald Yak project aims to create a modular, bidirectional and distributed signal processing and control system that leverages GNU radio. For that to happen, I need a solid understanding of GNU radio and its ecosystem. While I've been playing with it off and on for a decade or so, I have yet to build anything substantial for the simple reason that there was a puzzle piece missing. Last week, I discovered it. By accident. One of the fundamental things I'm attempting to achieve is the creation of a system that doesn't care which radio device you're using. In case you're wondering, I'm doing this because there is a proliferation of device-specific software that cannot keep up with the influx of new hardware, doesn't consider the growing use of network-connected radios forced by the increased RF noise levels in many communities across the world, not to mention connecting increasingly expensive computing hardware to lightning rods. If everything goes to plan, it should be possible to use the project with any radio device. This is easier said than done. In GNU Radio, this complex issue is addressed by having different blocks that represent different devices. You'll find receiver-specific source blocks and equivalent sync blocks representing transmitters. While that's all fine and usable, it means that if I were to publish, say, an FM receiver flow graph, essentially a collection of blocks representing software that implements an FM receiver, I have to decide how I want to deal with the specific device. Do I select an RTL SDR dongle as the device in my flow graph and let you figure out how to make it work on the Hack RF or the Pluto SDR sitting in your shack? Or do I make it completely hardware agnostic, requiring you to wire it all together for your specific situation? Neither is desirable or simple. Added to this is the problem that trying to make this work using a traditional analog radio would cause more issues, since there isn't a Yaesu FT857D block, nor is there one for an ICOM IC7400, let alone something from last century. Someone with some GNU radio experience might point out that there are source and sync blocks for an audio device, which would allow you to plug one of those radios into a sound card and access the receiver, or transmitter that way. While that would work, it requires that the radio is physically connected to a computer that's running GNU radio. It would also give you all manner of headaches attempting to change frequency in the same way as you could using an RTL SDR dongle. There are several ways to get remote radio control working across a network. For example, using Rig Control D and HamLib, we can change frequency on over 300 analog radios. But even if you do, you'll discover that getting the audio across the network creates a whole range of new issues. Not to mention that GNU Radio doesn't talk to HamLib-compatible radios. This is why many remote radio solutions are implemented as remote desktop sessions to a computer that is physically connected to the radio. While attempting to solve a completely unrelated challenge last week, I came across SOAPy SDR, described as a vendor and platform-neutral SDR support library. Essentially, it's a project that allows an application to interact with different devices, without needing to support individual radios. This allows an application developer to write their software to support SOAPy SDR, and from then on benefit from its ability to talk to lots of radios in a variety of different ways. For example, one of the inbuilt features is called SOAPy Remote, which allows you to connect to a SOAPy SDR radio and interact with it across a network. Specifically, you can send and receive as well as control the radio, essentially bundling together both the audio and control signals. SOAPy SDR also includes a tool called SOAPy Audio. While documentation is sparse, it appears to support HamLib, which means that you can, at least theoretically, connect a low-powered computer like, for example, a $5 Raspberry Pi Zero to your analog radio and access and control it across the network. Best part? It's supported by GNU Radio and many other applications. I've started creating a repository with the 50 things you can do with a software-defined radio, one directory per thing, that will contain the bits needed to run inside GNU Radio and across the network to any SOAPy SDR compatible hardware. Now, before you get as excited as I am, there's a few hurdles. I'm not yet sure of the status of SOAPy Audio, but it looks promising. I have the bits sitting on my computer and I'm working through them. For example, I'm not sure if the current implementation supports transmit. I also have anecdotal evidence that HamLib support is incomplete, but I don't yet know to what extent. I anticipate some coding in my future. I suspect it will be the equivalent of building a new SOAPy SDR module, but time will tell. I can tell you that I'm running an RTL SDR dongle connected to a low-power computer, and I can connect to it across the network with GNU Radio on my workstation and run a proof-of-concept FM receiver flow graph. There's no reason for either computer to be in the same room, let alone the same country. You'll find the project on my VK6FLAB GitHub page. I plan to work my way through the 50 items and discover what I don't know about GNU Radio. Feel free to play along. I'm Ono, Victor Kilo 6, Foxtrot Lima, Alpha Bravo.
Welcome to the 51st segment of Ham Radio History, a century of amateur radio, Ham's organizations, events, inventions. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR. With appreciation to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for his permission for us to use his website for these segments, we bring you this next chapter of Ham Radio History. 6 segments sans spark. This is part 4 of this segment. After the conference, a new bill was proposed directly by Secretary Hoover, again emphasizing broadcasting. In a letter addressed to Congressman White, Hoover said he believed that comprehensive legislation would ultimately be required but could not be rushed. Determining its shape would take time, probably another year. Meanwhile, he proposed a short bill to help manage things in the interim. This also would have the effect of sidelining the existing White bill. Significantly, he envisioned that broadcasting might be considered a public service instead of, or in addition to, a commercial business. If so, whatever legislation emerged would be fundamentally different from the previous laws. Setting this tone of public ownership, he wrote that the ether within the limits of the United States, its territories and possessions, is the inalienable possession of the people thereof, and that the authority to regulate its use in interstate and or foreign commerce is conferred upon the Congress of the United States by the federal Constitution. The proposed legislation would also codify the 1912 law to give the Secretary of Commerce the responsibility and power to regulate, at his discretion, the operation by licensees, including wavelengths, emission characteristics, and equipment, just as was provided in the White Bill. Naturally, it therefore raised the same warning flags as before, both at the League and at the National Association of Broadcasters. New regulations were put into effect starting on 25 January 1925 as a result of the convention. They included minor changes to the boundaries of the 5 amateur bands, 150 to 200 meters, 75 to 85.7 meters, 37.5 to 42.8 meters, 18.7 to 21.4 meters, and 4.69 to 5.35 meters. Frequency specifications were on the way, but hadn't yet been widely adopted. Spark should be abandoned as soon as possible, but continue to be permitted in the 170 to 180 meter segment, along with ICW. Strict requirements on equipment design included loose coupling to the antenna to reduce harmonics and other spurious effects, but there were still no requirements on power supplies, only that the emitted wave should be sharply defined. Quiet hours would only be observed above 150 meters wavelength as before, and all licensees would be granted access to all the bands. Thus, there were no further need for special licenses, and no new ones would be issued. Recognizing how strongly hams' identities were tied to their call signs, current holders of the special Z-calls would be allowed to keep them. A few months later, the Commerce Department announced a 6th new band of ultra-short waves at 3/4 meters for amateur reflection development or beam transmission. Both terms referred to directional radiation patterns. The band would be from 400 to 401 megahertz. Now we're all set to try beam transmission at a frequency where the physical dimensions of the reflector apparatus will be in the average amateur static room, commented Warner. While the band would not see much actual use for more than a decade, the early willingness of Commerce to provide amateurs with yet another band indicated the value they placed on the exploratory work hams had been doing. Band allocations, signal standards, regulatory authority, it was all there to form a framework for the future evolution of radio for decades to come, but not before a major flaw in its foundation would threaten to bring it all crashing down. Included in this material are quotes from the following. The Hoover Bill, QST, February 1925, page 7. New Regulations for Transmitting Stations, QST, March 1925, page 29. KB Warner, a new amateur band at 3/4 meters. QST, May 1925, page 36. With our thanks to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for the use of his website, Ham Radio History, A Century of Amateur Radio, Ham's Organizations, Events, Inventions, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, reporting for This Week in Amateur Radio.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
AMSAT has announced the launch of Students on the Air Days, a new initiative aimed at encouraging student participation in amateur satellite operations. The activity was inspired by AMSAT President Drew Glassbrenner, KO4MA, and his son Karsten, KQ4SJM, and is designed to promote regular on-air activity among licensed student operators. Students are encouraged to get on the air and operate via amateur satellites on the first and third Tuesdays of each month, beginning March 3rd, 2026. While student-to-student contacts are especially encouraged, all satellite operators are welcome to participate and help make students feel welcome on the air. To support coordination, AMSAT has created a dedicated hashtag Students on the Air channel on the AMSAT Discord server where participants can arrange contacts and share activity. Reports of student on the air satellite activity and contacts are encouraged and may be submitted to Karsten, KQ4SJM, whose contact information is available via QRZ.com. Activity reports will help AMSAT gauge participation and support future student-focused satellite initiatives.
European Space Agency astronaut and amateur radio operator Sophie Adenaut, KJ5LTN, is now aboard the International Space Station following her launch on the SpaceX Crew 12 mission on February 13th and docking on February 14th. With about 1 month remaining before submissions close for the AstroPi Mission 0 coding challenge on March 23, 2026, her mission highlights ongoing opportunities for young people to run their own code aboard the space station. AstroPi Mission 0, organized by the European Space Agency in partnership with the Raspberry Pi Foundation and the European Space Education Resource Office, gives young people the chance to have their code run in space. Participants write a short Python program that reads data from the AstroPi color and luminosity sensor aboard the ISS and uses it to set the background color of a personalized image displayed for astronauts as they go about their daily duties and tasks inside the Columbus Laboratory module. Adenaut serves as an ambassador for the AstroPi initiative, reinforcing the connection between astronaut missions, STEM education, and global outreach. Licensed in amateur radio, she is among the ISS crew members able to support educational engagement activities, including amateur radio on the International Space Station, which enables scheduled radio contacts between astronauts and students around the world. Mission 0 is designed to be accessible to beginners and can typically be completed in a single 1-hour session using only a web browser. Young people aged 19 and under may participate individually or in teams of up to 4. Working under the supervision of a registered mentor, such as a teacher, educator, parent, or youth leader, who provides the classroom submission code required to enter programs. All eligible entries that follow the official guidelines are scheduled to run on the ISS for up to 30 seconds. Each successful team receives a certificate signed by an ESA astronaut, showing the exact time their program executed and the station's orbital position at that moment, providing a lasting record of their software running in space. Programs such as AstroPi Mission 0 complement APRS school contacts by offering multiple ways for students to interact with the International Space Station, whether by speaking directly with astronauts over amateur radio or by running their own code aboard station hardware. Amateur radio clubs and educators are encouraged to share this opportunity while time remains for participation. Eligibility requirements vary by location. Readers should consult the official Mission 0 website.
SpaceX founder Elon Musk has suggested building a giant electromagnetic catapult on the moon to launch satellites into space, reviving a concept first explored more than 50 years ago. In early February, Musk told employees at XAI that the company could eventually establish lunar factories to build artificial intelligence satellites and launch them using electromagnetic mass driver rather than conventional rockets. Musk argued that advances in heavy lift launch capability, particularly SpaceX's Starship vehicle, could enable delivery of large amounts of cargo to the lunar surface. Once infrastructure exists, he suggested that manufacturing satellites on the moon and launching them from there could dramatically reduce cost. He also noted that in-space propellant transfer and lunar industrial development could support a permanent scientific and manufacturing presence beyond the Earth. The concept of a lunar electromagnetic launcher is not new. Physicist Gerard O'Neill proposed similar mass drivers in the 1970s as a way to fling mined lunar material into space for use in constructing orbital habitats and solar-powered satellites. Working with colleagues and student researchers at MIT, O'Neill helped build experimental prototypes demonstrating that electromagnetic acceleration could launch payloads without chemical rockets. Later designs suggested that a system only a few hundred feet long might be sufficient to send material off the moon. More recent studies have continued to explore the practicality of lunar launch systems. In a 2023 report to the U.S. Air Force Office of Scientific Research, General Atomics researcher Robert Perrine argued that modern electromagnetic launchers could be powered by abundant solar energy on the moon, eliminating the need to transport large quantities of rocket fuel from Earth. He suggested that adapting technologies such as the Navy's electromagnetic aircraft launch system could form the basis of a reliable lunar launch capability. Such systems could play a role in a broader lunar industrial ecosystem. Early lunar bases would initially depend on machinery and supplies delivered from Earth, but the long-term goal would be to use lunar resources, including silicon, aluminum, titanium, iron, and water ice, to manufacture hardware locally. Launching satellites or raw materials from the moon's weaker gravity could make resupply of lunar orbit or deep space infrastructure far more economical than launching everything from Earth. While Musk's timeline and plans remain speculative, the renewed discussion highlights growing interest in lunar manufacturing and infrastructure to support future space activity.
Every April 18th, radio amateurs worldwide take to the airwaves in celebration of World Amateur Radio Day. Operators take to the airwaves in celebration of amateur radio and to commemorate the formation of the International Amateur Radio Union in 1925. The IARU has announced that the theme for this year's World Amateur Radio Day will be entering the next century of amateur radio, communications, and innovation. Special event stations will be active around the world. Of note so far is the Radio Amateurs of Canada, holding a Get on the Air World Radio Amateur Day special event. They encourage amateurs to get on the air and contact as many RAC stations as they can. The RAC official stations will operate across Canada from 0000 UTC until 2359 UTC on that day.
Congratulations to Fred Archibald, VE1FA, and Helen Archibald, VA1YL, who were recently recognized by Radio Amateurs of Canada for their years of amateur radio commitment. The husband and wife team has been chosen to receive the RAC's Amateur of the Year Award for 2025. Married for more than 50 years, they have been almost equally married to their amateur radio involvement, which has included teaching, mentoring, net control, club leadership, and equipment restoration. You can read more about them on the RAC website at rac.ca.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, available as a stream to your favorite digital device on Spotify, TuneIn.com, Overcast, iHeartMedia, and wherever you download your podcasts.
Bruce Page, KK5DO, is here now with this week's AMSAT report. Bruce?
Thanks, John. As part of the AMSAT Youth Initiative, March 3rd was the first of AMSAT's Student on the Air, or STOTA, days. A vision of AMSAT President Drew, KO4MA, and his son Karsten, KQ4SJM. Student activity on the satellites is encouraged on the first and third Tuesdays of each month. The rules are simple. There are no rules. Get on the air on the first and third Tuesdays of the month as satellite passes and schedules allow. Student-to-student contacts are especially encouraged. However, all users are welcome to join in the fun on any and all amateur satellites. A new AMSAT Discord channel, #students-on-the-air, has been created to help students find one another or for anyone participating. This is not the only Discord channel AMSAT has. Here are a few others: SCED, Rover-Ops, SAT-Questions, AMSAT-Chat, and more. This is Bruce Page, KK5DO. Back to you, John.
And thanks, Bruce, for that report.
It is time for this week's look at the solar weather and the terrestrial propagation forecast. Solar activity continued at low levels with isolated C-class flaring coming from regions 4381 and 4384, which remain the primary drivers of the activity. The largest event of the period was a C2.9 flare from region 2381 on March 3rd. Region 4384 continues to rotate further onto the disk, but foreshortening still hinders a definitive characterization of its magnetic complexity. Region 4378 showed some new flux emergence but remained mostly inactive. Region 4383 simplified into a unipolar group following the loss of its trailing spots. The region 4380 decayed to plage. No Earth-directed coronal mass ejections were observed in available coronagraph imagery. Looking ahead, solar activity is expected to be at low levels, with a chance for isolated M-class minor to moderate flaring, which is expected. Solar wind parameters reflected the onset of a positive polarity coronal hole high-speed stream. Solar wind speed increased to 450 kilometers per second. Solar wind parameters are expected to remain enhanced due to the ongoing influence of the coronal hole high-speed stream. Residual enhancements are likely to persist, keeping conditions slightly above background levels before another enhancement is expected with the onset of a negative polarity coronal hole high-speed stream. For more information concerning radio propagation, visit the ARRL Technician Information Service, read a quick guide to HF propagation using solar indices, and check out the propagation page of Carl Wetzel-Swab K9LA. Also, for customizable propagation charts, visit the Voice of America CAP Online for Ham Radio website.
Just ahead in radio sport this week, March 7th and 8th, the ARRL International DX Contest, that's single sideband phone. March 7th through the 15th, it's the Novice Rig Roundup, that's CW. March 7th, Wake Up, QRP Sprint, that's CW. On March 7th, it's the Russian YLOM contest, CW and phone. March 8th, the FIRAC HF contest, that's CW. And March 8th through the 11th, that's the Classic Exchange, that is CW. And also on March 8th, it's the Four States QRP Group Second Sunday Sprint, that's CW and phone. Remember to visit the ARRL contest calendar for more events and information. Upcoming section, state, and division conventions, March 6th and 7th, the Birmingham Fest hosting the ARRL Alabama Section Convention. That's in Trussville, Alabama. March 15th, the Winterfest 2026, the National Capital Area Ham Radio Fair, ARRL Virginia State Convention in Vienna, Virginia. March 21st, St. Patrick's Day Hamfest, hosting the ARRL West Texas Section Convention. That's in Midland, Texas. And on March 28th, the Central Dakota Amateur Radio Club Hamfest, hosting the ARRL North Dakota State Convention. That's in Bismarck, North Dakota. And remember to search the ARRL Hamfest and Convention database to find events in your area.
It's been 20 years since amateur radio had a presence on one small island in the Arabian Sea off western India's coast. The DX India Foundation is renewing the attempt it made last year to put the island back on the ham radio map. Jim Meechan, ZL2BHF, tells us what to expect next. The heavy rainstorms last year canceled the plans of the DX India Foundation to activate Arnala Island. The island, one of India's most coveted sites in the IOTA program, carries the designation of Alpha Sierra 169. Sarath, VU2RS, announced recently on the DX World website that he is hoping to bring a 3-day activation there starting on the 1st of May. There has been no amateur radio activity on the island since 2006. A successful activation would not only fulfill one of the relatively new Foundation's objectives to activate rare IOTAs, it would also put Arnala Island on the logs of eager chasers everywhere.
From 171 astronomical units away, Voyager 1 is still calling home, and the small Dutch radio telescope just proved its faint signal can still be heard across the void. Using the historic Dwingelo Radio Observatory, the team managed to capture one of the faintest transmissions ever recorded from a human-made object in deep space. Launched in 1977, the Voyager probes have operated for nearly half a century, completing flybys of major planetary bodies before heading toward interstellar space. Voyager 1, the first to launch, is now about 171 astronomical units from Earth, with 1 astronomical unit defined as the average distance between Earth and the Sun. On November 13th this year, Voyager 1 is expected to reach a new milestone, 1 full light day from Earth. Once that threshold is crossed, any communication with the spacecraft will require at least a full day for a signal to travel one way. The distance alone underscores the scale of the recent amateur detection, a signal barely stronger than silence. According to NASA, Voyager's signal reaches Earth at a power level of just 10 exponent negative 16 watts, roughly 1 part in 10 quadrillion. The agency notes that a modern digital watch operates at a power level 20 billion times greater than the power striking a deep space network antenna from Voyager. Despite those odds, the amateur radio in space AMSAT group used the Dwingelo radio telescope in the northeastern Netherlands to detect the spacecraft's carrier signal. The group had previously picked up Voyager 1 in 2006 when it was 14.7 billion kilometers away. Since then, the spacecraft has traveled billions of kilometers further, making the signal significantly weaker. In all these years, Voyager has traveled a lot of distance, Thomas Telkamp, an active volunteer at the Dwingelo Radio Telescope, said at the AMSAT Symposium. So the signal is really weaker at this point than it was years ago. The Dwingelo Telescope was not originally designed to receive Voyager's 8.4 GHz telemetry. According to the CA Mueller Radio Astronomy Station, or CAMRAS, a new antenna had to be mounted because the dish was built for lower frequencies. At higher frequencies, the mesh surface of the dish becomes less reflective, making the reception of faint signals even more difficult. That technical constraint added another layer of complexity to the effort. To isolate the extremely weak carrier signal from background noise, the team relied on orbital predictions of Voyager 1. According to CAMRAS, they corrected for the Doppler shift caused by the motion of both Earth and Voyager 1. Once adjusted, the signal became visible live in the telescope's observation room, and later analysis confirmed that the Doppler shift matched that of Voyager 1. While Voyager 1 remains operational, the spacecraft has shown signs of age. A diminishing fuel supply has forced NASA to shut down some scientific instruments to keep core systems running. There have also been technical glitches, including a period when Voyager 1 transmitted a garbled pattern of zeros and ones due to corrupted memory. In another incident, the spacecraft shut down its main transmitter entirely. That issue was resolved in October 2024 when engineers switched temporarily to a backup transmitter that had not been used since 1981. Since then, communication with the spacecraft has been steady, with NASA's Deep Space Network continuing to receive data from both Voyager probes. Even so, the mission is gradually winding down. With fuel supplies running low, Voyager 1 is expected to power down permanently in the early 2030s. For now, though, more than 25 billion kilometers away, it is still whispering, and both NASA and a handful of determined amateurs are still listening.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
The Board of Trustees of the Canadian Amateur Radio Hall of Fame is pleased to announce that G.F. Smith, Victor Alpha 3, Golf Sierra, Silent Key, has been named to the Hall of Fame. Radio Amateurs of Canada recognizes deserving amateurs by appointments to the Canadian Amateur Radio Hall of Fame. The Constitution for the Hall specifies that the appointment as member of the Hall is made for outstanding achievement and excellence of the highest degree for serious and sustained service to amateur radio in Canada or to amateur radio at large. The trustees of the Hall have interpreted the Constitution to mean that the person has performed significant service over many years to enhance the well-being of amateur radio. Born on February 18, 1942, Geoffrey Reed Smith was a man of strong values and a lifelong commitment to service, both within his local community and around the world. He believed deeply in the importance of kindness, never letting a day pass without offering an encouraging word, a helping hand, a smile, or a quiet act of goodwill. Geoff was a graduate of Mount Allison University in Sackville, New Brunswick. In his professional career, Geoff spent 35 years at St. Andrew's College in Aurora, Ontario as a teacher, housemaster, counselor, coach, assistant headmaster, university advisor, and cadet corps commander. He was also the initiator of computer science at the college. He was appointed headmaster of King's Edgehill School in Nova Scotia between 1988 and 1990, and after his retirement, he spent 12 rewarding years as principal at Canadian College in Lanciano, Italy. Geoff passed his amateur radio operator's qualification in 1977 and was first licensed as Victor Echo 3, Kilo Charlie Echo, and in 1992 he obtained the call sign Victor Alpha 3, Golf Sierra to go along with his initials. He was a valued and popular member of the York Region Amateur Radio Club for over 40 years. He became the club's chairman of the board in 1978, and he held several positions between 1978 and 2019, including membership and activities director, Hamfest director, and president. He also involved himself in many of the club's public service events, volunteered at the 2015 Pan Am Games, and was a member of the York Region Amateur Radio Emergency Service. He also taught many of the amateur radio courses for the club. Geoff served as the Ontario South Director, Assistant Director, and Vice President of the Canadian Amateur Radio Federation, and was the Ontario South Director for Radio Amateurs of Canada from 2004 to 2009. He was also net controller on several Ontario's public service nets. From 1982 until he became a Silent Key on December 4, 2019, Geoff was secretary and co-founder of Coax Publications Incorporated and was actively involved as co-author in the preparation, editing, and writing of the Canadian Amateur Radio Basic and Advanced Study Guides and in editing the Instructor Guides. Radio Amateurs of Canada and the Board of Trustees of Carhoff sincerely congratulate Geoff Smith, Victor Alpha 3, Golf Sierra, on his appointment to the Hall of Fame. A detailed account of his achievements will be presented in an upcoming edition of the Canadian Amateur Magazine. For more information on the Canadian Amateur Radio Hall of Fame, please visit them on the web.
It's the year of the club, and the second annual ARRL Ham Radio Open House in April offers a chance to show off your club's high-tech gear and skills to your community. ARRL is encouraging radio clubs and schools to promote amateur radio science and technology by opening their stations to the public with an open house during the month of April. In addition, groups are encouraged to set up in public places or conduct outdoor activities, such as parks on the air, activations, or satellite contacts. The open house event is built around World Amateur Radio Day on Saturday, April 18th, but your open house may be scheduled at any point in the month.
Wrapping up another year of action taken against unlicensed radio broadcasters in the U.S., the FCC recently submitted a report to federal lawmakers summing up its enforcement activities in the fiscal year 2025. Since Congress enacted the Pirate Act, an acronym for Preventing Illegal Radio Abuse Through Enforcement, the Federal Communications Commission has been responsible for reporting its annual activities with the enhanced power it was given in the year 2020. Its most recent report covers the government's fiscal year of 2025, which ran from October 1 of 24 through September 30 of 25. According to the report, the FCC issued 28 notices to property owners or managers for permitting illegal broadcasts from their premises. 17 of those were directly related to one of the so-called pirate sweeps that the FCC conducts, concentrating in 5 markets found to have the most pirate stations. In the same period, the FCC went directly after radio operators themselves, issuing 6 forfeiture orders and 10 notices of apparent liability for forfeiture. Separately, it entered into 3 consent agreements with radio pirates. Each agreement contained a 20-year compliance plan. It's not known what the total monetary penalties will ultimately be for any violations issued, even though the amount specified in the General Pirate Act have increased over the year. Adjusted for inflation, the penalties now carry a maximum of $122,000 per day. Although the FCC is responsible for these enforcement actions, the agency does not collect the amounts. That task is given to the U.S. Department of Justice.
It is time for this week's edition of AMSAT Satellite Shorts from all over. We begin this week at the 2026 Hamcation AMSAT Forum. AMSAT President Drew Glassbrenner, KO4MA, highlighted the AMSAT status page as a convenient way to see which satellites are active using user reports updated every 2 hours. He noted the page is especially useful for tracking scheduled or intermittent satellites and mode changes, helping operators quickly decide what to try on the air. Glassbrenner also reviewed the breadth of current on-orbit operating resources, countering the common perception that there are no satellites up there. He outlined AMSAT's education and youth efforts, including CubeSat simulator kits, a free 113-page classroom guide at cubesatsim.org, and free online satellites in space courses at buzzsat.com. He noted that AMSAT now offers free membership for students aged 25 and under with proof of student status. On the engineering side, he discussed progress on Golf T, Fox Plus 1U satellites, the LTM1 linear transponder module for student partners, and a modernized PACSite board as AMSAT works toward new missions and future higher performance opportunities. The full presentation may be viewed on YouTube. Next, NASA's Artemis II lunar mission faces a potential delay after engineers identified a helium flow issue in the upper stage of the Space Launch System rocket during recent testing at Kennedy Space Center. The helium system is used to pressurize fuel tanks and purge propellant lines, and the anomaly requires the rocket to be rolled back to the vehicle assembly building for inspection and repair. The move removes the possibility of a March launch attempt, with NASA now targeting no earlier than April, while teams investigate the cause and determine whether additional testing will be required. Artemis II is planned to send astronauts Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, and Canadian Space Agency astronaut Jeremy Hansen on a roughly 10-day mission looping around the Moon. The flight will mark the first human journey beyond low Earth orbit since the Apollo era and is a key step toward future lunar landing missions. NASA officials say launch timing will depend on repair progress, data review, and confirmation that the rocket's system performed as expected after returning to the pad. In our final AMSAT satellite short, Europe's Ariane 6 rocket flew its most powerful configuration, the Ariane 64, for the first time on February 12th, successfully launching 32 Amazon broadband satellites into low Earth orbit from the Guyana Space Center in French Guiana. The satellites were deployed into an approximately 465-kilometer orbit less than 2 hours after liftoff, and Arianespace confirmed mission success. The spacecraft are part of Amazon's planned Amazon LEO broadband constellation intended to compete with SpaceX's Starlink network. Amazon has booked launches across multiple providers, including Ariane 6, Vulcan, New Glenn, Atlas V, and Falcon 9, as it works towards deploying thousands of satellites. Delays among several launch providers have tightened global launch availability, prompting Amazon to secure additional rides where possible. The successful debut of the Ariane 64 restores Europe's heavy lift launch capability and highlights the continuing rapid expansion of large low Earth orbit satellite constellations.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, your amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air, available as a podcast on iTunes, Google Play, iHeartMedia, and Spotify.
AMSAT is offering a limited-time promotion for new and renewing members that includes a free digital copy of Getting Started with Amateur Satellites. The promotion is being offered as AMSAT begins the 2026 membership year. Anyone who joins or renews their AMSAT membership during the promotional period will receive a download link for the latest edition of Getting Started with Amateur Radio Satellites in their membership confirmation email. The guide is designed to help radio amateurs understand the fundamentals of satellite operation and serves as a practical reference for both newcomers and operators returning to the hobby. Additional information about AMSAT membership is available at launch.amsat.org. In addition to this limited-time promotion, AMSAT membership includes a subscription to the AMSAT Journal, access to archived issues, discounts on selected items in the AMSAT online store, and opportunities to participate in AMSAT elections, committees, awards programs, and other AMSAT activities and programs. Members may also access archived proceedings from past AMSAT space symposiums through the AMSAT member portal. Beyond these tangible events, AMSAT membership supports development, launch, and operation of amateur radio satellites along with education and outreach efforts. Joining AMSAT is not just about individual benefits, it is about being part of the community that builds and operates amateur satellites for radio amateurs worldwide. As AMSAT looks ahead to 2026, the promotion helps launch another year of growth and opportunity for amateur radio in space.
All eyes will be on the project known as Future Geo, to be presented at the Bowen Observatory's Bowen Space Day, to be hosted by AMSAT DL. The program is taking place on March 28th in conjunction with Germany's Space Day and Day of Astronomy. Much anticipation surrounds the proposed geostationary amateur radio payload, which is to succeed the QO-100 satellite, providing access for Europe and parts of North America. All ears, however, will be on the scheduled contact to be made between students and the Neumayer 3 research station, Delta Papa 0 Golf Victor November, in Antarctica. The observatory's director, Philo Elsner, Delta Juliet 5 Yankee Mike, will lead that activity. Youngsters and their families are also being invited to participate in a full day of activities organized by the European Space Education Resource Office of the European Space Agency. SRO Germany was established at Bochum in 2018.
The 2026 National Hurricane Conference, taking place in Orlando, Florida from March 29th through April 2nd, will again include amateur radio workshops. Amateur radio workshops at the National Hurricane Conference will include presentations by such leaders from the ham community as Rob Macedo, KD1CY, of the VoIP Hurricane Net, Josh Johnston, KE5MHV, ARRL Director of Emergency Management, Julio Ripoll, WD4R, Assistant Coordinator at WX4NHC, and Bobby Graves, KB5HAV, Net Manager of the Hurricane Watch Net. Graves gave a preview of a new program he will be presenting, built around the theme Impact. While Category 5 hurricanes may get more attention from the media, some tropical storms may make a greater real-world impact than bigger weather events. For amateur radio operators, one report can make a difference, can make an impact. As Graves said, your reports matter. With Julio Ripoll scheduled to step down this year, he may be introducing his successor at WX4NHC during the workshops as well. If you can't attend in person, the forum will be live streamed on the Hurricane WatchNet YouTube channel.
Clublog, a popular database used by DXers, is gaining 2 new volunteers to help with the growing website. To tell us more about the changes at Clublog, we go to John Ross, KD8IDJ, who has the details.
Tony Ryder, G6GLP, and Colin Wilson, G3VCQ, have joined the project to help support its expanding worldwide user base. Clublog is an online service for amateur radio operators providing log analysis, DXCC tracking, de-expedition support tools, and online QSL requests. Currently, more than 132,000 call signs are registered in the system, contributing to an extraordinary 1.3 billion QSOs for analysis. Every day, thousands of new logs are uploaded, reflecting constant activity from operators across every continent. Ryder and Wilson are joining a dedicated volunteer group that includes Alan Judd, 5B4AHJ, who maintains the club's highly detailed DXCC database, Marcus Nickolich, 5B4WN, author of the Expedition Tools and OQRS system used by DXpeditions worldwide, and help desk volunteer Dick Hadaway, W4PID. Clublog has always been built by volunteers, and its success comes directly from people who care about helping the amateur radio community, said founder Michael Wells, G7VJR. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
With such a large global audience of users, support is more important than ever. It's fantastic to welcome Tony and Colin to the team, said Wells, as I know their friendly and helpful style will be so appreciated by our users. I'm immensely grateful for their willingness to contribute their time and expertise.
International Amateur Radio Union Amateur Satellite Frequency Coordination has been completed for NutSat 3, a 3U CubeSat dedicated to amateur radio service. The satellite using the call sign Bravo November 0 Uniform Tango Charlie is operated with support from National Formosa University. NutSat 3 is designed to provide voice repeater, APRS, and telemetry services to the global amateur satellite community. The primary payload is a cross-band FM voice repeater with an uplink on 145.980 MHz using a 67 Hz CT CSS tone and a downlink on 435.250 MHz. Telemetry will be transmitted on 437.850 MHz using 1K2 AFSK with AX.25 protocol. All telemetry is unencrypted and intended for public reception and analysis. An APRS Digipeater will also operate on 145.825 MHz, allowing stations to relay position and status data through the satellite. The Digipeater is expected to respond to both its unique call sign and the ARIS alias using standard APRS paths. The open telemetry format and public data distribution are intended to encourage worldwide participation, including monitoring through networks such as SatNogs. Beyond communication service, the mission includes a strong educational component. Students will participate in RF design evaluation, mission analysis, and satellite communications performance studies. Public dashboards and shared telemetry are planned to promote transparency and community collaboration. NutSat 3 is manifested for launch aboard a Space One Kairos rocket from Spaceport Key in Kushimoto, Japan, into a planned 500-kilometer polar orbit. Space One recently postponed the vehicle's third flight following weather analysis, and the launch window now extends through March 25, 2026. A specific launch date is expected to be announced approximately 2 days prior to liftoff. Keras conducted 2 previous launch attempts in March and December 2024, both of which ended in mission failure during early flight. The upcoming mission will mark a return-to-flight opportunity for the Japanese commercial launch provider. Frequency coordination for NutSat-3 was requested on December 25, 2025, and completed on January 31, 2026.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
As part of its youth initiative, AMSAT just published its Satellites in Space coloring book on www.buzzsat.com. The free coloring book is available at no charge in both English and Spanish language versions. The complete title of the coloring book is Satellites in Space, Help Us Live a Better Life on Earth. This theme shows how satellites play an important role in virtually every aspect of modern life. The book includes 12 two-page spreads that illustrate different roles that satellites play and the benefits they provide. For example, one spread explains helping farmers grow bountiful crops for healthy meals on every table. Another spread features teenagers using amateur radio sharing messages and pictures with friends around the world. Each topic also includes a one-page discussion guide for adult leaders to use when working with youth and the coloring books. Frank Karnauskas, N1UW, AMSAT Vice President of Development, explains, "We have produced the coloring book for several reasons. First, it is the right thing to do. We must educate and encourage youth to become active contributors in satellite and communications technology. Second, it helps us satisfy part of our responsibilities spelled out in AMSAT's Articles of Incorporation to encourage skills even at the earliest stages of our youth's development. Third, it begins to develop an awareness in young people of amateur satellites and amateur radio. We, of course, won't convert every young person into an amateur radio operator and an AMSAT member, but we will get our fair share. The earlier we start, the better our chances." There are 2 very unique aspects of AMSAT's youth initiative. First, it is a community-based program. The materials are designed so that any parent, scouting leader, amateur radio club, or teacher can use the materials as they stand. It does not require buy-in by a school system to get started. The second unique feature is that although its ultimate goal is to interest kids in amateur satellites and amateur radio, the materials appeal to a broader spectrum of youth interests. If they have an interest in current events affecting our planet, or in their future careers, we have at least begun a dialogue with which we can nurture their possible interest in satellites and communications technologies. And if we haven't won them over along the way, at least we have educated them in some aspects of STEM and perhaps even inspired them. The Spanish language version of the coloring book is our first step in attempting to publish the coloring book in as many languages as there are AMSAT sister organizations. I am interested in exchanging ideas with representatives of AMSAT organizations around the world to help make this happen. AMSAT thanks Amateur Radio Digital Corporation for a generous grant to make this project possible. Persons interested in viewing the coloring book and perhaps downloading copies for the kids can learn more at www.buzzsat.com.
And our final story this week, FCC Chairman Brendan Carr proposed a plan to bring spectrum abundance to weird space stuff, cutting-edge, emergent ventures in space, namely supporting telemetry, tracking, and command for on-the-horizon endeavors like orbital laboratories, satellite repairs, and private inhabitable spacecraft. If adopted by a vote of the full commission at its March monthly meeting, the FCC would start a formal proceeding to meet the spectrum needs of these technologies in 2 ways. First, the FCC would explore opportunities to clarify its rules so that emergent space operations have reliable access to spectrum for their missions. Second, the FCC intends to identify new spectrum bands that meet the safety and operational needs of emergent space activities. Chairman Carr shared with his fellow commissioners a draft notice of proposed rulemaking, which would, if adopted, look to find ways to use market-based principles to see spectrum resources put to more intensive use in the service of the space economy. The NPRM seeks to clarify and expand the FCC's traditional regulatory classifications so that emergent operations have more predictable spectrum access. The proceeding would also explore new spectrum bands that could support new use cases on a dedicated basis to provide a clear, reliable, and expeditious path to support the groundbreaking technologies and services that companies are developing in space. Spectrum is a critical component of all space operations. Even for spacecraft that do not provide radio communication services to the public, reliable spectrum access is mandatory for safety functions like telemetry, tracking, and command to control the spacecraft in orbit. American innovators, however, currently face an acute shortage of usable and readily accessible spectrum for TT&C. And that spectrum crunch threatens to delay or prevent the growth of domestic space technologies and jeopardize United States leadership in the booming global space economy. The Commission is aggressively pursuing a policy of spectrum abundance in outer space. Earlier this year, it launched a proceeding to release up to 20,000 megahertz of spectrum for traditional conductivity services, including high-speed broadband from constellations in low Earth orbit. The Commission has also begun a comprehensive review of its licensing and regulatory framework for space communications.
This Week in Amateur Radio is holding open auditions for news anchors for the weekly national worldwide amateur radio news service. If you have a good radio voice and can reliably read provided news copy, we are looking for you. This, of course, is an all-volunteer position. An amateur radio license is not required. You must have a high-quality microphone, headset mics are not used, and be familiar with audio editing software to record and edit your finished news stories before uploading. If you would like to try out for a weekly or bi-weekly anchor position with North America's premier amateur radio news on air and podcast, please send an email to our producer, George, W2XBS. You can include a sample MP3 of yourself reading news copy sent as an attachment to W2XBS77@gmail.com. That's whiskey, the number 2, X-ray Bravo Sierra 77@gmail.com. Be sure and use Anchor Audition in the subject line. Please include your phone number and a good window of time for a callback to discuss your submission and our operating logistics to see if This Week in Amateur Radio is a good fit for you. We hope to hear from you soon.
This Week in Amateur Radio is heard all around the world on the amateur bands, and on great repeater systems like the KB3 CNN Gateway FM Association repeater, on 146.730 MHz every Tuesday evening at 7:30 p.m., covering the wide area of western Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia. If your repeater system carries This Week in Amateur Radio, let us know via email, and we will mention your station in an upcoming edition. Send your information to W2XBS77@gmail.com.
Many of the news and information items heard in this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio have been provided by the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL Audio News Service, and the ARRL Letter, AMSAT, the Radio Amateurs of Canada, the Shortwave Listening Post, the Federal Communications Commission, the Radio Society of Great Britain, and Ofcom, the South African Radio League, the International Amateur Radio Union, the Wireless Institute of Australia and the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters, the Amateur Radio Newsline, the Rain Hamcast, Eric Guth, 4Z1UG and QSO Today, QRZ.com, the International Telecommunications Union, the 425DX News, Parks on the Air, and the Soda Reflector, and various news sources on the Internet.
With special thanks to all our weekly news sources and to you, our listeners, that wraps up this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. If you would like to write to us, you can find everything you need, including archive editions of the news service, at our website at twiar.net. And now for all of us at This Week in Amateur Radio headquarters and all our news team around the world, this is Will Rogers, K5WLR in Fayetteville, Arkansas, wishing you 73.